and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever. Today is Wednesday, August 27th, and it's a great pleasure and honor to have as our guest the Secretary of State of Vermont, Sarah Copeland Hanzas, who served as a member of the Vermont House of Representatives from 2005 to 2023, and then ran for the Secretary of State position in 2022 and was successful in that race, and then ran again for re-election last year in 2024, was re-elected, and is now serving in her second term as the Secretary of State of Vermont. Secretary of State Copeland Hanzas, thank you very much for making the time for this conversation.
It's so good to be with you. Thank you.
Great to have you back here. Always fun when you show up. Some of your appearances here have been some of my favorite shows that we've ever done, so I really appreciate you making the time. So what I wanted to talk to you about a little bit today was an executive order that President Trump issued, I think it was on August 13th, about mail-in balloting, mail-in voting, and also voting machines or tabulators. And I just thought maybe we could start by reading a bit of that executive order just to give us the background context here. Mr. Trump said, "I'm going to lead a movement to get rid of mail-in ballots," capital letters, "and also, while we're at it, highly, quote-unquote, inaccurate, very expensive and seriously controversial voting machines, which cost 10 times more than accurate and sophisticated watermark paper, which is faster and leaves no doubt at the end of the evening as to who won, who lost the election. We are now the only country in the world that uses mail-in voting. All others gave it up because of the massive voter fraud encountered. Again, uppercase letters. We will begin this effort, which will be strongly opposed by the Democrats because they cheat at levels never seen before by signing an executive order to help bring honesty to the 2026 midterm elections." Now, very shortly afterwards, you issued a statement in response to that saying that only individual states control the conduct and operations of elections within their state boundaries, and only the U.S. Congress can make laws regulating national election. And also that the track records of mail-in voting and the use of voting machines or tabulators were very good in terms of their reliability and accuracy. So I guess I just wondered, has there been any further effort on the part of the federal government since the issuance of that executive order to limit mail-in voting or the use of tabulators, or has that been it so far?
Well, I have to say that the basis of this announcement by the president seems to be based on his lack of understanding about how elections work. 98% of Americans and everyone in Vermont who votes in our state and federal elections votes on paper, which means that is an auditable, recountable election every time we do it. Only Louisiana and certain counties in Texas still vote with machines that do not have a paper ballot. And, if by voting machines, which was a little vague, if he was referring to the vote tabulating machines that we and many states use, and he thinks it's going to be more accurate or less expensive to then do the alternative, which is hand count by human beings, I can tell you that more than likely will not be accurate. It will not be a short time period. If you are the elections officer of a jurisdiction with 3 million people, that's going to take you a long time to count those votes. And when you factor in human error, because anytime you put a human being on a task, it's bound to include a human error, that could result in our election results being much less accurate. And so these objectives that the president is talking about with eliminating mail-in balloting and eliminating voting machines is really bad for our democracy. We need to unpack a little bit. Where did mail-in voting come from, right? It came from the acknowledgement that when we send our servicemen and women to faraway places to defend our country, the only way they can participate in an election in the democracy that they're out there defending is if we have an established set of practices around mailing ballots. It turns out that many states, including Vermont, have recognized that voters really appreciate the convenience of being able to vote by mail. And so many states like Vermont have expanded mail-in voting either to be universal vote by mail, like we do for the general election, or no excuse absentee. You don't have to have a reason. You can simply go onto our voter portal and request that your primary ballot or your local ballot be sent to you in the mail, and you can vote from the comfort and convenience of your home.
So how long have we had mail-in voting here in Vermont? I remember it was expanded in 2020 during the COVID year, but it had been around before then, I think, in some form or another. But the verdict seemed to be that it was very successful in 2020 and then again in 2024. I mean, is that basically your sense of it?
So before 2020, Vermont had no excuse absentee ballots, which means that you contact your town or city clerk, or you go to our Vermont voter portal and just request your ballot, and you don't have to have a reason. We did a universal vote by mail for the November election in 2020 because we knew that it might not be safe in November of 2020 to be standing in a long line of people and being checked in to vote by the retired social studies teacher or retired postmaster of your community. And Vermonters really liked having that ballot in front of them. There are a couple of foundational reasons why vote by mail works really well for everyone. And then there are some special groups of people that vote by mail is particularly advantageous for. So let's talk about the everyone first. When you have your ballot in the voting booth, you have about 5 minutes with your ballot, maybe 10 if you feel comfortable spending a few minutes to Google a candidate or do a little research on an issue that you care about to try to figure out which of these candidates is better on the issues that I care about. That doesn't leave you with a lot of time to feel confident in having made your choices. And it's part of the reason why we oftentimes see a lot of drop off in those down ballot races, because people hear the ads on TV for governor or for president, but they might not hear ads on TV for all of the other candidates who are on their ballot. When they get their ballot, 4 to 6 weeks in advance of the election, they can spend time looking up the voter guide that our office creates, researching the candidates, finding what those candidates stand for, and actually contacting them to say, this is the issue that I care about. What do you think? Or what would you do about this? And it makes all of us smarter voters and more empowered voters, because we know that our votes are going to the people who we're confident are going to do the things we think are right. Now let's talk about some of the special populations of Vermonters for whom vote by mail is really important. If you live in a rural area of Vermont and you travel out of your town in order to get to work every day, chances are it's more challenging for you when you're leaving for work at 7 in the morning and maybe not getting home until 6 or 7 at night to be able to get to the polls during their open hours, right? If you are older, or if you are disabled and you have a little bit of mobility issues and maybe standing in a voting booth or sitting at a voting booth and filling out that ballot, sort of under pressure in 5 minutes is a little more challenging, you really appreciate having more time with your ballot and having the ability to fill it out at your comfort pace. If you are working a job that requires you to travel, and maybe you realize all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I'm going to be out of town on election day. Well, your ballot is arriving at your kitchen table at least a month ahead of the election. And so it makes it much more possible for folks who have that kind of a busy lifestyle to be able to participate in elections.
And I would imagine that mail-in voting also increases the volume of voting, right? In essence, it's making it so much more convenient and easier instead of having to go to the polls on election day or Tuesday during the week, when, as you say, a lot of people are either busy with work or with the kids or something else going on. I would imagine that would increase the number of ballots that are cast, right?
Yes, when we look at the data of the 2020, 2022, and 2024 elections, all of those voter turnout levels were higher than the previous 4 elections. So even when you factor in the difference between a presidential election year and an off-cycle election, every single election that we have held via universal vote by mail has been a higher turnout election. And in fact, between 60 and 75% of Vermonters have taken advantage of being able to cast that ballot from the comfort of their kitchen table.
So I'm assuming that one of the reasons the president is concerned about mail-in voting is that he has concerns about voting fraud. And then there were a lot of allegations around that back in 2020. I think there were roughly, if I recall correctly, about 60 court cases that dealt with allegations of voter fraud, but I don't think any of them went anywhere because there was no evidence to back any of them up. So therefore, is it your sense then that voting fraud is safe and reliable and accurate, and the opportunities for someone to tamper with the results are non-existent?
We have very full and complex elections procedures and safety and security procedures around voting by mail. And we have 247 town and city clerks who are duly sworn to follow those procedures and help to make sure that our elections are fair, accessible, and secure. And the fact of the matter is, over the last 3 election cycles, with record turnout and participation among Vermonters, we have only seen a handful of irregularities. And when those were actually investigated and looked more deeply into, all we have found is an instance of someone trying on purpose to vote twice to prove the president's contention that there's rampant voter fraud, and this person was caught. And so I think this is completely unfounded for the president to imply that voting by mail is inherently less secure. I think anytime you make it easier for people to participate in their democracy, that's a good thing for our democracy. We want the busiest and hardest working people in our community to be able to vote. We want the elderly or the disabled people in our community to vote. We want our military service members to be able to vote in our democracy. And that's why many states use vote by mail, and that's why we will continue to defend it.
And it's interesting because I recall last year, right around this time, that then candidate Trump was in favor of mail-in voting and was encouraging people to vote by mail because I assume he thought it was going to benefit his candidacy or the candidacy of other Republicans in the election. Yes. And in fact, our governor, who is also a Republican, agrees with my position that it's actually good and empowering for our democracy when we make it possible for every eligible voter to participate. And, what I would say back if I ever had the opportunity to talk to the president about this is, you won an election by mail-in voting. So why would we throw that away now? Maybe it has something to do with the 2026 elections, but dark thought there. But anyway, we'll leave it there. But I guess I just also wondered, do all 50 states allow some form of mail-in balloting? You said Louisiana and Texas might be the exemptions, but otherwise all the other 48 states have mail-in voting? Every state has procedures in place that allow overseas and military service members to vote. And so Texas counties and the state of Louisiana have a system in place to allow for their service members to participate. But every other state, including Texas and Louisiana, have some form of absentee ballot. Sometimes you have to have an excuse. Sometimes that excuse
is a very low barrier. Other times it's a higher barrier. You have to be, have a doctor's note or, be in the hospital or in some other way demonstrably unable to get to the polls. Some states allow and encourage their young adults who are away at college to continue to participate in their democracy. Others put some hurdles and barriers in front of them. So, this is really an example of our federal system that allows the states to determine the time, place, and manner of elections. And when Congress has made laws about voting and voting procedures, it has generally been to ensure more equal and more consistent access in expanding the franchise to people who maybe have been shut out in the past, such as the UOCAVA, the Uniform Overseas and Military Voter Act. I can't even remember what the acronym stands for at this point, but UOCAVA is a very strict law passed by Congress that requires all of the states to demonstrate that they have sent a ballot out to their military service members. Because before that, it was a little more hit or miss that service members weren't able to get their ballots in time. And so this effort and indeed all of the efforts of this administration in the elections realm since they took office in January seem to be more aimed at limiting people's access to the ballot box and making it harder for people to vote, which is absolutely the wrong direction to go in a democracy, plain and simple.
And I think it's also worth pointing out that while the president said in his executive order that no other countries use mail-in balloting, actually about 34 other countries do allow that, including Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, Germany. So that was a misstatement, I think.
I'm not surprised that you did your homework, Andrew, and I really appreciate that because it turns out it is the strongest democracies in the world who have the ability to mail your ballot in or to receive your ballot by mail because we recognize in a global economy, people aren't always within a 5-minute drive of their polling place anymore in this busy, busy world.
So I just wondered, going back to kind of the next steps question, are we, at this point, is there any thought that perhaps our Attorney General, Charity Clark, should be sending a letter to the Justice Department about this, or is it a case of we're just going to wait and see how things go from here? If maybe that was a one-day obsession the president had and now is, been forgotten about, or do we think that we need to kind of push back on this right now before any more momentum might be built into it?
So my assessment right now is that there isn't a concrete step that we need to take at this moment. The president said he was leading a charge to get rid of mail-in voting. He said he was going to issue an executive order. His spokesperson walked that back a little bit a few days after these bold assessments and statements, probably because their attorneys have told them that the president doesn't get to dictate election law. Only Congress can do that. And indeed, the executive order that he issued around other elections law changes back in March has been largely stayed by the court because our attorney general and other states' attorneys general sued to have those blocked. And so I think that a wise course of action would be not to attempt to do something by executive order that the Constitution specifically reserves for the states or for Congress. So we'll be waiting and watching. The reason I'm getting out and talking about this is because I know that there is a great deal of anxiety among Vermonters about whether some of these changes that they're hearing proposed are going to be able to be dictated to the state of Vermont. And I wanted to reassure people that Vermont law is what we will follow in this instance until and unless Congress passes a law that makes changes to how we do elections, whether that's by mail-in ballot or by requiring demonstration of citizenship, those things have to go through Congress. And, when I talk with our congressional delegation, I know that they are not in favor of eliminating mail-in voting. They're not in favor of requiring people to come and show documentary proof of citizenship, because that would put an unnecessary and expensive barrier in front of someone and their constitutionally guaranteed right to vote. And so we'll continue to work with our Attorney General in the event that we do get an explicit attempt at an executive order. And in the meantime, we're working with other secretaries of state, because there are many states that are red states that use vote by mail, and their citizens feel very strongly about it for all the reasons that I've already talked about.
Let me turn now to the piece about the voting machines. I mean, again, is there any evidence to suggest that they're somehow unreliable, or make it easy for the wrong numbers to come out? I mean, I know there was that big, again, growing out of the 2020 election, that big case between Fox and Dominion voting machines, which seemed to be fairly decisively settled for the Dominion side.
Yes.
I'm sure when Fox wrote the check for $787 million, they probably got the message there. But as best I've heard, there's really no reason to think that they're any less reliable than, as you say, hand counting, and a lot faster. I mean, you get to know the results of elections very quickly, which is a good thing.
So voting tabulators are faster and and more accurate, than counting by hand. And we know that because we do an audit after every general election, and we take a handful of communities' ballots and we put them through a different kind of scanner than the tabulator that was used on election night. And we come up with almost entirely 100% the same count. The places that we find changes are often due to human error, either in accidentally transposing a number when they were entering results, or by mistakenly counting a write-in incorrectly. And those are very much based on human error and not the machine's fault. So voting tabulators are accurate and they're fast. And I think it's important to remind Vermonters that the tabulators that we use are kept under lock and key in the vault of your town or city clerk's office until the day that they take them to the polling place for an election. And anytime those voting tabulators are being used, they are being watched by the Board of Civil Authority members in your community who know exactly how to keep them secure. The other thing that folks should know about the tabulators is they're not connected to the internet. They're not plugged into a cable. They're not Wi-Fi equipped. You can't hack the software. The clerk will run a test run of ballots right before the election to ensure that the tabulator is accurately counting. And they will then clear that test ballot result out, start over at 0. And when all of the ballots in the election have been counted, they will push a button and get a paper readout of every single election that was on that ballot. And that paper readout corresponds directly to the paper ballots that are then saved in the vault at the clerk's office. And we know that because we come back afterward and audit them.
So then all those claims, again, from 4.5 years ago in the 2020 election, that there was a widespread voter fraud, are as baseless as it gets.
They are. I can't emphasize enough that we feel the utmost confidence in how our elections are conducted and in the work that each one of our town and city clerks does to keep them safe and secure and accessible.
And just before we have to run, I just wanted to ask you one other thing, kind of related to all of this, but it was a couple of weeks ago. My understanding is that the federal government wanted to obtain voting information or information about voters here in Vermont. I guess kind of analogous to the information about folks who are getting, the SNAP food benefits. Where does that stand at present? I understand your office declined to provide that information to the federal government. Is that a case closed now at this point, or not quite?
I don't expect it's entirely case closed. I understand that that more and more states are receiving this outreach from the Department of Justice, specifically asking for voter rolls and voter data. This data contains a lot of Vermonters' personally identifiable information, like your driver's license number, the last four of your social, your date of birth. All of those things are ought to be protected in every instance. And in fact, Vermont law specifically says that we will not release our voter registration lists to the federal government. And anyone who wants to obtain a copy of the publicly available voter list, which doesn't include all of the categories that the Department of Justice has asked for from other states, if you need a publicly available copy, it will not contain all of that sensitive data. And you have to sign a declaration that says you will not provide this to the federal government, to any foreign entity, and you will not use this for commercial purposes. And so, in our reading of the law, and until we are told otherwise, our interpretation of the Constitution is that the states get to pass the laws about elections. Our law in Vermont says the federal government does not get all of that deep, detailed information about people's voter registration data.
It puzzles me as to why they're even interested in it. I mean, what's the possible benefit to having someone's driver's license number or social security information? I mean, what do they need that for?
It's a little bit of a mystery to me as well, although, when you dig a little bit more deeply into the kinds of data that DOJ, for instance, has been trying to compile and put together, it does make you wonder if there is something bigger or deeper going on there. There is no rightful reason, no law enforcement reason that the federal government needs to have state voter data. We are in charge of keeping our voter registration rolls. We are sworn to uphold election law and to prosecute instances of potential voter fraud. And that's not a function that we need the federal government for.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there for today. But again, I want to thank you very much, Secretary of State Sarah Copeland Hanzas, for making the time for this conversation. Really important subject, I think, in our democracy. And hopefully we won't need to be worrying anything more about whether or not it'll be possible to vote by mail, because it certainly, as you say, is very convenient. And I did it for the first time myself last year, and it was all good. Anyway, well, thank you again, and thanks to all of you who've been with us. I hope you found the show interesting and the program informative, and we'll see you again the next time. Take care.